Hello, and welcome to Rappaport Connects, where we interview notable Rappaport alumni and colleagues. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sean Horrigan. Today, we're joined by the newly named Executive Director of the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy, Amanda Teo. Before we begin, let me give you a little bit of background on Amanda. Prior to her role at the Rappaport Center, Amanda worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts. She served as Chief of Staff at the Suffolk County DA's office, as well as Assistant District Attorney in the Appeals Unit. She has clerked for the Honorable Judge Kermit Lopez and the Honorable Judge Sandra Lynch. Amanda completed her undergraduate degree at Princeton, received her MA in English from Harvard, also pursued a PhD from Harvard, and ultimately received her JD cum laude from Harvard Law. Amanda, welcome to Rappaport Connects and to the Rappaport community.
Thank you so much, Sean, for giving me this opportunity to introduce myself to the larger Rappaport community.
I'm so glad you're here. Amanda, in your most recent roles, you served as counsel to the U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts and Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Civil Rights Unit. In the latter role, you advanced the DOJ's mission to ensure all communities have access to constitutional and effective policing by enforcing 34 U.S.C., which prohibits patterns of practices of conduct by law enforcement that deprive individuals of rights protected by the Constitution or federal law. Tell us more about this work and what that experience was like.
Sean, thanks for the question. So being sworn in as counsel to the United States Attorney and an Assistant United States Attorney in the Civil Rights Unit was among the proudest moments in my personal and professional life. I came to this country at the age of 8, not speaking a word of English. I had no conception of what being American was, except maybe a theory that this would allow me to eat McDonald's every night and go to Disneyland. And this country conferred me citizenship when I was about 17. So it is like a testament to America's promise of inclusivity and opportunity that I had the privilege during my career to put 4 words after my name. And those 4 words are not Assistant United States Attorney, even though I'm very proud of that title, but those 4 words are for the United States. Every single time I got to stand up and introduce myself as Amanda Teo for the United States, I was reminded that I had this responsibility of representing not a party or a partisan, not a president, but the whole of the United States, all of its people and what it stood for. And that responsibility really defined the 2 roles that I had at the U.S. Attorney's Office. So as counsel, I had a pretty diverse portfolio. Writ large, that portfolio was constructed around a commitment to help us live our vision, both externally and internally. So I handled strategic planning around equity and inclusion. I aligned our goals with those of Main Justice around recruitment, retention, and development of personnel, around community and stakeholder engagement, and around criminal legal reform. And as an AUSA in the Civil Division, I worked to investigate unconstitutional actions of a local police department that violated the 4th and 14th Amendment rights of the people it was supposed to be protecting and serving.
You also spent 11 years at the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, 3 as Chief of Staff, and close to a decade as an appellate prosecutor. Can you tell us about that experience and some of the programs you worked on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel so privileged to have been given the opportunity to support my colleagues at the DA's office as Chief of Staff. And I think my tenure there really exemplifies what I tell students all the time, which is that you should say yes to the stretch roles, even the ones that terrify you, maybe especially the ones that terrify you. I had spent the first part of my life aspiring to be an academic. And once I reconciled myself to the idea that sunk costs were really not a reason to keep doing something that didn't make your heart sing, I really had a career crisis. I didn't know what to do next. And I took advantage of Harvard's career networking offerings, and I reached out to an array of different lawyers in the community. And the people who I connected with, who seemed to really have a job that had a purpose, that was engaging to them each and every day, where they were excited to get out of bed in the morning, were all prosecutors, local prosecutors. But I found out rather quickly that whatever my credentials were, I couldn't get a job at the DA's office. when I asked, they shared that they generally only hired from the pool of students who had interned for them in the past. And it didn't matter how many First Circuit judges I clerked for. And so when I heard that, I decided, you know what, like I need to figure out whether this is the right job for me or not. So I actually said, hey, you know what, can I come and just work for free? Like you said, you only hire interns. I will be your intern. And the chief of the appellate unit at the time said, look, I'm not going to turn down free work from a barred attorney, but just so you know, there are no jobs here, but go ahead. And so I came on my first day. I sat with all the other interns in the basement computer laboratory, and I worked my tail off for about 45, 50 days. And at the end of that, they actually did find me a job. And that was the beginning of my journey at the DA's office. So you asked about highlights. I think let's talk about 3 of them. So as many people know, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office was known for piloting a first in the nation program of presumptive declination for low-level crimes, and also a systematic revisiting of unjust convictions. I was really proud of helping to set the culture for that change. We really had to figure out how to recruit and hire, to develop and to sustain a staff that was trauma-informed, that was people-centered, that had cultural humility. And we really had to cultivate conditions where people felt safe to acknowledge mistakes and to learn and reflect and to experiment and innovate and fail. So I was really excited to try all of those things out. I think a second highlight is just the innovations that we did to keep the legal system responsive and just operational during a public health crisis. We had 2 days to take an office that was relentlessly paper bound, and also where everybody until a month before the pandemic were using desktops to remote work. And we found ways not only to keep the courts open and to keep our operations running and to keep our community and our staff safe, but also ways to bring our partners together in the judiciary and the trial court, amongst the defense bar, to reduce unnecessary incarceration, to consider alternative means of accountability, and to address the social determinants of criminal conduct. So we really used the pandemic as an opportunity to advance the mission of the office. And then I think a final highlight was looking at our internal processes to ensure that they were equitable and inclusive. With the help of and leadership of our general counsel, we chartered the office's first wage equity review. We navigated a pandemic-driven furlough and found creative ways to make sure that the people who were being paid the least in the office were taken care of. And overall, we just worked really hard to ensure that those who cared so much for others in their service were cared for by us, by the leadership during a moment of deep crisis. And so that work was really, I think, in many ways, the highlight of my career.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's fast forward a little bit to present time. What attracted you to your current role at the Rappaport Center, and how does its mission align with your values?
I keep saying that if the Rappaport Executive Director position was not available, I would have had to invent it, because it really is a manifestation of all the different things that I've done in my career. I spent 10 years as an academic and a teacher. I spent another 10 years in public service and in leadership, in policy, and this role really brings all that together. But I think what I love most about the Rappaport Center is that it is really an instantiation of Jerry Rappaport's vision, mission, and values. And those are utterly consistent with my own personal ones. So my professional choices are, I think if I was to think about what informed those choices, it really comes from 3 sources. The first is my grandfather. My grandfather grew up in poverty in rural China. His schooling extended only up to 9th grade for 2 reasons. 1, because he couldn't afford it. And 2, because he couldn't get to it. Like the closest school was an hour away. And he actually didn't have shoes. The family got 1 pair of shoes, each child got 1 pair of shoes each year. And that was for Chinese New Year. And the rest of the time they were supposed to wrap it back up and put it away so that they don't get their shoes dirty. And when my grandfather eventually became very, very successful, the first thing he did was to go back to his village and build a school. And, I learned from that you have a responsibility to give back, but really the way to give back is through education. And I think the second source of my professional values is my Judaism. I'm a Jew by choice. And I think my religion compels me to see that we have an obligation to repair the world. And I'm always mindful of the teachings in the Pure Cut Avot, which says it's not on you to complete the work, but neither may you desist from it. So I think a lot about that when I think about public service. And then I think the last source of my professional values is Lonnie Guinier, with whom I had the pleasure of learning when I was in law school, and I was her TA and her research assistant for a number of years. And she taught me some really profound lessons about inclusivity, but also about hope. She was always tirelessly working, despite some really challenging circumstances, and here I'm paraphrasing from her, she said, we have to bridge the dissonance between American promises and actions. And I think that optimism, that choice of public service as a way to bridge that dissonance, that's something that I carry with me too. So from these three sources, I have values that I think are really perfectly aligned with the Rappaport Foundation's mission, with the way that Jerry and Phyllis have lived and what they hope to build so that we can serve Greater Boston and Massachusetts.
Can you tell us your vision as the executive director of the Rappaport Center? What do you hope to maintain in terms of programming and what's currently in place? And what do you see evolving?
I'm really lucky that with the leadership of the inaugural executive director, Lizzie Medvedeau, and really the commitment of the Rappaport Foundation, I think Jerry's legacy has flourished, and the center has really instantiated the values and mission that he and Phyllis were thinking about when they endowed the center. But I also think that we need to sustain what has allowed the center to be so successful, and we also have to evolve it to meet the moment. There is so much divisiveness in the political climate right now, cynicism in our public spaces. There are efforts both from the administration, but also a feeling, a vibe amongst folks out in the world that public service is somehow not a particularly good way of making change. And so I think there's no more urgent or timely challenge right now than to really exemplify why public service is a noble profession. And there's no better way of doing that than to sustain and build a community of doers who can listen and who can talk across difference, who understand the value and relevance of policy to their communities, and who are engaged in bending the arc through service. And so my hope is to really find ways to nurture and sustain that community. I think some of the particular things that I'm looking toward are, first and foremost, strategic planning. I really like strategic planning. One of the things I often say is that there should be no wish management. We should understand what our desired outcomes are and plan around that. And so aligning our organization's mission and values with our programming and optimizing that for impact, that's something that I really enjoy doing. And I'm excited to begin that process with our incredible advisory board, with the Rappaport Foundation, and also with the Dean's Office here at Boston College Law School. I really want to bring in additional speakers, visiting professors, senior fellows, and summer fellows that have diverse lived educational and professional experiences and perspectives. Again, I think it's really important to have people who can help us see different dimensions of policy and who can help demonstrate the impact of policies on different communities. And then the thing that has been occupying my brain lately is really thinking about how to reach and support more emerging leaders. Sean, we were so lucky to have over 90 applications for this summer's Rappaport Fellowship in Law and Public Policy. But out of those 90 students, we could only fund 12. But there are so many students out there who are outstanding in their leadership capacity, who have a real commitment to public service. And I want to figure out, how do we bring them into our community? How do we serve them and build their leadership capacity as well beyond this fellowship? So that's going to be one of the things that I'm puzzling out.
So speaking of those 12 fellows, I understand you have just named the 2025 Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy cohort. Congratulations. That's very exciting. Tell us a little bit about this group of students and what makes them unique.
Well, first and foremost, this is my first cohort as executive director. So they're going to be extra special for me for time immemorial. But they really are a special class in their own right. These 12 individuals come from a variety of law schools in the greater Boston area. They all shone because of their academic capacity, their commitment to public service, and also their leadership capacity. And what I love about it is that it's a really high merit class. And by that, I mean, like, merit to me is a function of the goals and the mission of the institution that wants to use it as a metric of selection, right? That's one of the primary teachings that Lonnie Winier shared in her books. And our students, the way they are demonstrating merit is, I think, particularly connected to the values of the Rappaport Foundation and the Rappaport Center. These are students who have lived experience. They've really seen personally the effects of policymaking, both good and bad. We have students whose family members have been incarcerated, students who are DACA recipients. We also have students who have deep professional experience, who have worked in immigration law as grassroots advocates and as organizers. And so are bringing different people-centered perspectives to policy work. And then lastly, we also have students with incredible academic credentials, lots of students who have done master's or doctoral level work in different disciplines that all will be very useful in public service and public policy. And so I'm really excited to see what happens when these students are placed in agencies around Massachusetts, what kind of value they can add to those workplaces. But I'm really excited to see how they can add value to each other and come together as a cohort to build the network that they're all going to be using, 10 years from now when they're all leaders in these spaces.
I'm very excited to meet them and watch them in action. It sounds like an amazing group of young people. Final question for you today, Amanda, is what advice would you give your younger self as a law student or someone who's interested in pursuing a career in law?
Well, that's such a good question. The first piece of advice I would have for myself is don't try to keep so many options open that it disables you from making a choice and committing to it and seeing how that goes. I think as a younger student, I was so focused on not making a mistake. Every single decision about where seems so fraught. And what I've learned along the way is that in many ways, the best choices I've made, the opportunities I've said yes to and have learned from the most are ones that I don't think I could have prepared for. It just took my being able to say yes to some unexpected opportunities and to not be scared or to be so overwhelmed by imposter syndrome that I wasn't able to say yes to them. That's first. I think second is to really take mental health seriously. At the DA's office, when I first started, I think being incredibly unmoved by the terrible things that we were encountering each and every day seemed like it was a professional obligation. It wasn't. I remember showing up to a really terrible autopsy of a young child when I was, I think, 6 months pregnant with my second child. And I think I was embarrassed by the idea that I was affected by that. We're so much better now in the legal profession, like even in the law schools now, about talking about secondary trauma, thinking about how do you take care of yourself while you're also taking care of other people in your work. And I just wish I'd seen that earlier and I'd taken that more seriously. I think the third thing I would say to myself is to really build a personal board of directors. I think early on in my career, I thought I had to do everything on my own and that being independent and individualistic was the way to professional success. And what I've learned is that I can really benefit from having a network of people who are on my side. Some of them are mentors and some of them are friends and colleagues. And these are people who are going to be relentless about telling me the truth, in encouraging me when I need the encouragement, but also in challenging me to say yes to things when I'm scared. And building that board, that personal board of advisors, is really what I'm trying to do for the 12 fellows that we have this summer, encouraging them to reach out to the whole Rappaport network of fellows, past, present, and future, and also reaching out to their mentors and availing themselves of the help from our Rappaport advisory board. And I think the last thing I would say is, I really would tell myself what I know now, which is that public service is noble. Cornel West said something which has always resonated with me, which is that justice is love in action, right? And policy and service is the language of that love. There are so many different ways to serve. There are ways to serve whether you are in private law or you're in public law. But that service itself, that compulsion to do something good in the world, that is a noble thing. And we should continue to foster that.
Well said, wise words. We really need good people in public policy and driving change now more than ever. So I'm happy to know that you are going to be at the helm of working with these 12 young people who will hopefully be that change. Well, Amanda, it's such a pleasure to have spoken with you today, and I'm so excited to have you as a colleague and at the helm of the center. So congratulations, and we look forward to seeing what comes next.
Thank you so much, Sean. The pleasure is mine. The honor is mine to be the executive director for the Rappaport Center.
Thank you again.